There's a moment most people don't talk about. A quiet moment, usually late at night, when the noise finally stops, when the scrolling ends, when the distractions fade, and you're left alone with one uncomfortable thought. Why am I still not where I want to be? You've worked, you've tried, you've told yourself you'll figure it out, and yet something isn't clicking. Money comes in and disappears. Opportunities show up and slip away. Motivation rises and then quietly dies. And deep down, you start to wonder, is it just bad luck or is it me? Now listen carefully, because this is where everything changes. The truth is not what you've been told. You're not broke because you don't work hard enough. You're not stuck because you're not smart enough. You're not behind because you started too late. You are where you are because of how you think. Let that sink in. Because in this audiobook, The Mind of a Millionaire, How Rich People Really Think, you're about to step into a completely different mental world. A world where money is not chased, but created. Where problems are not feared, but used. Where time is not spent, but invested. This is not about hype. This is not about overnight success. And this is not financial advice. This is something deeper. This is mental reprogramming. In the next chapters, you will discover why most people stay broke even when they earn more. Why millionaires think in systems while others think in survival. Why your habits are silently controlling your financial future. Why emotions, not income, are the real reason people fail. And how to rebuild your thinking from the ground up. Because here's the line you need to remember. You don't rise to wealth. You think your way there. Let me say that again. You don't rise to wealth. You think your way there. And if your thinking stays the same, your life will too. Most people are stuck in a loop they don't even see. Wake up. Check the phone. Rush through the day. React to everything. Spend without thinking. Repeat. Day after day. Not because they're lazy, but because they're unconscious. They are living on default. And default thinking creates default results. That's why two people can earn the same amount and end up in completely different lives. One builds freedom, the other builds stress. Same income, different thinking. And today, you begin to understand why. But before we go deeper, I want you to make a quiet decision. Not for anyone else, just for you. If something in this audiobook hits you, if a line makes you stop, if you feel that shift inside, don't ignore it. That's your awareness waking up. And if you feel it, acknowledge it. Maybe by hitting like, maybe by sharing what line hit hardest in the comments. Not for validation, but as a contract with yourself that you're ready to think differently. Because this is not passive listening. This is transformation. Now take a breath. Because chapter 1 is where most people fail before they even begin, not because it's hard, but because it demands something they've been avoiding their entire life. Ownership. And once you truly understand this, you'll never look at your life the same way again. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Lie You've Been Living. Most people think their life is happening to them, that the economy decides their future, that their boss controls their income, that their past defines their limits. And as long as you believe that, you will always feel stuck, because you've given away control. But millionaires think differently. They operate from a simple, uncomfortable truth. If it's in my life, it's my responsibility. Not blame. Responsibility, there's a difference. Blame says, it's my fault, I failed. Responsibility says, it's in my control to change. And that shift changes everything, because the moment you take responsibility, you take back power. Most people don't do this, not fully. They say they want success, but they still blame the past. They blame the system. They blame other people. And every time they do, they delay their own progress. Because you cannot fix what you refuse to own. Let me ask you something, and I want you to be brutally honest. When your finances aren't where you want them to be, what do you tell yourself? Do you say, I need to learn, grow, and adjust? Or do you say, it's just hard right now, I'll figure it out later? Because that difference, that small, invisible difference, is the gap between stuck and successful. Millionaires don't wait to figure it out. They decide to figure it out. There's no delay, no emotional negotiation, just action. And it starts with one sentence. I am responsible. Not tomorrow. Not when things get easier, now. Because responsibility is not pressure. It's permission. Permission to change your life without waiting. And here's what most people don't realize. The longer you avoid responsibility, the heavier your life feels. But the moment you accept it, things get clearer. Not easier, clearer. You stop guessing. You stop reacting. You start directing. And direction is what builds wealth. Not luck, not talent. Direction. This is where your new identity begins. Not as someone who hopes, but as someone who leads their own life. And once you step into that, something unexpected happens. You start noticing things you ignored before. Your habits, your patterns, your excuses. And that awareness, that quiet, sometimes uncomfortable awareness, is the beginning of your transformation. Because you cannot change what you don't see. And now, you're starting to see. But here's the part most people aren't ready for. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's where the real work begins. Because in the next chapter, you're going to confront something even deeper. Something that has been quietly controlling your financial life for years, without you even realizing it. Your beliefs about money. And once you uncover them, you'll understand why you've been stuck, even when you were trying your best. Most people never question what they believe about money. They inherit those beliefs. From parents who struggled, from environments that lacked, from conversations filled with fear, stress, and limitation, and without realizing it, they build their entire financial life on those invisible foundations. So now, let's go deeper. Dear friends, we've just started working on this channel, so we'd really appreciate your support. Please like the video and leave a few words in the comments. It'll really help us promote it. We'd be very grateful. Let's keep going. Chapter 2, The Invisible Script Running Your Life. Every decision you make with money, every reaction, every hesitation, it all comes from a script. A script you didn't consciously write, but one you've been following for years. Maybe it sounds like this. Money is hard to make. Rich people are different. I'm just trying to survive. I'll never have enough. These are not just thoughts. They are instructions. And your brain follows instructions. Here's the dangerous part. You can be working harder than ever and still be running a script that keeps you stuck. Because effort without alignment creates frustration. That's why some people earn more, but still feel broke, because their identity didn't change, and identity always wins. Let me explain. If deep down you believe money is scarce, then every time you get it, you'll treat it with fear. You'll either hold it too tightly or lose it too quickly. If you believe wealth is not for people like you will unconsciously sabotage opportunities. You'll hesitate. You'll doubt. You'll step back when you should step forward. Not because you're incapable, but because your identity rejects what it doesn't recognize. And this is where millionaires think differently. They don't just change their actions. They rewrite their script. They understand something most people ignore. Your financial life is a reflection of your internal beliefs, not your intentions. Your beliefs. That's why this audiobook is not about strategies first. It's about awareness, because once you see the script, you can rewrite it. So let's pause for a moment, and I want you to ask yourself, what did I learn about money growing up? Not what you think now. What you absorbed. What did you hear? What did you see? Was money a source of stress? Was it avoided? Was it fought over? Because those moments, those repeated emotional experiences, they programmed you, and now they're playing out in your adult life, quietly, automatically. But here's the truth that changes everything. What was programmed can be reprogrammed. You are not stuck with your past thinking, but you do have to become aware of it, because awareness is the beginning of control, and control is the beginning of change. Millionaires don't ignore their thinking. They audit it, they question it, they replace it. If a belief doesn't serve them, they remove it, without emotion, without attachment, because they understand. Keeping a limiting belief is more expensive than losing money. Let that hit. Most people are afraid to lose money, but they're comfortable keeping beliefs that guarantee they never build it, and that's the trap. So today, you begin to break it, not by forcing new thoughts, but by questioning old ones. Every time you catch yourself thinking, I can't afford that, pause and ask, is this a fact or a habit? Every time you think, that's not for me, ask, why not? Because most limits are not real, they're repeated, and repetition creates illusion. But once you challenge the illusion, it starts to lose power. This is how thinking shifts, not overnight, but deliberately, one thought at a time. And as your thinking changes, your decisions start to change. And as your decisions change, your results begin to follow. That's how wealth is built, from the inside out. Now here's where it gets even more interesting, because once you start rewriting your beliefs, you'll notice something uncomfortable. You'll start seeing how much of your life was driven by emotion, spending to feel better, avoiding to feel safe, delaying to avoid discomfort, and that leads us to the next truth, one that separates those who stay broke from those who build real wealth. It's not about how much you earn. It's about how you handle your emotions around money. And in the next chapter, you're going to understand why most people are not managing money. They're managing their feelings, and that realization might change everything. Most people believe they have a money problem, but they don't. They have an emotional problem that shows up in their bank account. And until you understand this, you will keep repeating the same cycle no matter how much you earn. Chapter 3. You're not broke, you're emotional. Let's be honest for a moment. Have you ever spent money, not because you needed to, but because you felt something? Stress, boredom, frustration, even success. You tell yourself, I deserve this, or it's not a big deal, or I'll fix it later. And in that moment, it feels right. But later, regret. Now flip it. Have you ever avoided looking at your finances because it made you uncomfortable? Avoided checking your account? Delayed making a decision? Ignored an opportunity because you didn't feel ready? That's not logic. That's emotion. And here's the truth most people never hear. Your financial life is not controlled by logic. It's controlled by emotional patterns. Millionaires understand this early. That money is neutral, but people are not. People are reactive. They spend when they feel low. They save when they feel scared. They invest when they feel excited. They quit when they feel uncertain, and that emotional inconsistency creates financial instability. You don't need more money to fix that. You need emotional discipline. Let me say that again. You don't need more money first. You need more control. Because without control, more money just amplifies your problems. That's why people win the lottery and lose everything. That's why people get raises and still feel broke. Because their emotions didn't change, so the outcome didn't either. Now here's where it shifts. Millionaires don't remove emotion. They manage it. They feel everything. But they don't let feelings make decisions. There's a gap, a pause, a moment between impulse and action. And inside that moment is power. That's where wealth is built, not in the big decisions, but in the small moments, where you choose discipline over reaction. Let me give you a simple example. You see something you want. Old thinking says, I feel like buying it, so I will. Millionaire thinking says, do I want this, or do I want what this costs me long term? That question alone changes everything, because now you're not reacting, you're thinking. And thinking creates control. Control creates consistency. And consistency builds wealth. This is not about becoming robotic. It's about becoming intentional. Because right now, most people are being controlled by invisible triggers. A bad day leads to spending. A good day leads to spending. Bored leads to spending. Stressed leads to avoiding. And they call it normal. But it's not normal. It's unconscious. And unconscious behavior never leads to extraordinary results. So here's your shift. Start noticing your patterns, not judging them, not fighting them, just noticing. When do you spend emotionally? When do you avoid responsibility? When do you hesitate out of fear? Because awareness creates space, and space allows change. Millionaires create space between feeling and action. That's why they can stay calm when others panic. That's why they invest when others hesitate. That's why they hold when others sell. Because they are not controlled by the moment. They control the moment. And that's a skill, a trainable skill, one that separates those who react from those who build. Now here's something deeper. Your emotions don't just affect spending. They affect opportunity. Think about how many times you've held back because you felt uncertain. How many times you didn't ask, didn't try, didn't move because it felt uncomfortable. That hesitation costs more than any bad investment because missed opportunities compound just like money, but in reverse. And that's what keeps people stuck, not lack of ability, but emotional hesitation. So here's the new rule. Feel everything, but decide nothing until you're calm. Because clarity lives in calmness, and calmness creates better decisions. And better decisions create a better life. Now imagine this. You wake up one day, and your emotions no longer control your money. You don't react. You respond. You don't chase. You choose. You don't panic. You plan. That's the beginning of financial maturity. Not when you earn more, but when you become stable inside. Because internal stability creates external growth. And once you master this, something powerful happens. You stop living in reaction and start living in strategy. And that brings us to the next level of thinking. Because once emotions are no longer in control, you begin to see something most people never notice: patterns, systems, leverage. And in the next chapter, you'll discover why millionaires don't think in effort, they think in systems. And once you understand that shift, you'll never look at work the same way again. Most people believe that working harder is the answer. Work more hours, push more energy, stay busy, stay exhausted, and somehow, one day, it will all pay off. But here's the uncomfortable truth. There are people working harder than you who will never become wealthy, not because they lack discipline, but because they are solving the wrong problem. Chapter 4. The Trap of Hard Work. You were taught that hard work equals success, and to a point, that's true, but only to a point, because hard work without direction is just controlled exhaustion. Let that sit with you. Most people are not building wealth. They are maintaining survival. They trade time for money, over and over again, hour for hour, day for day, year after year. And they call that progress. But here's the problem. Time is limited no matter how hard you work. There are only 24 hours in a day. So if your income is tied directly to your time, your growth has a ceiling, and that ceiling is invisible. That's why some people feel stuck even when they're busy all day. Because busyness is not the same as progress. Millionaires understand this early. They don't ask, how can I work more? They ask, how can I make my effort multiply? That's a completely different question, because now you're not thinking in hours, you're thinking in systems. Let me explain. A person trading time for money thinks like this: I work leads till I get paid. Simple, but limited. A system thinker asks, how can this work once and pay me repeatedly? Now everything changes. Instead of working more hours, they build something that works without them. An asset, a system, a process. And that's where wealth begins, not in effort, but in leverage. Leverage means one action creates multiple results. It means your time is no longer the only source of income. It means your energy starts compounding. Think about it like this. A person who works a job earns once. A person who builds a system earns again, and again, and again. Same effort, different outcome. That's the shift. And here's the part most people miss. You don't need millions to think this way. You need awareness. Because the moment you start asking, how can I make this scalable? Your brain starts looking for different solutions. Instead of, how do I finish this task? You ask, how do I make this repeatable? That one shift separates workers from builders. Now let's go deeper. Because systems are not just about business. They're about thinking. A system thinker looks at life differently. They don't react to problems. They design solutions. If something keeps happening, they don't complain. They fix the root. If something wastes time, they remove it. If something works, they repeat it over and over again. Because repetition creates results, and systems create repetition. This is why millionaires don't rely on motivation. They rely on structure, because motivation is inconsistent. But systems are reliable. Most people wake up and decide based on how they feel. Millionaires wake up and follow a system. That's why they move forward even when they don't feel like it, because the decision was already made. Now here's the question you need to ask yourself. Where in your life are you relying on effort instead of building systems, your work, your finances, your habits? Because if everything depends on you, everything stops when you stop, and that's the hidden danger. You become the bottleneck of your own life, always needed, always busy, always tired, but never free. And freedom is the real goal, not just money. Freedom of time, freedom of choice, freedom of direction, and that only comes when your life is not dependent on constant effort. It comes when your thinking evolves. From doing to designing, from reacting to building, from working to multiplying. This is the moment where your mindset begins to expand, because now you're not just trying to earn, you're trying to create, and creation is where wealth lives. But here's where it gets even more powerful, because once you begin thinking in systems, you start seeing something else, something most people completely ignore: time. Not just as something that passes, but as something that compounds. And in the next chapter, you're going to understand why millionaires are obsessed with time, not because they have less of it, but because they understand its true value. And once you see time the way they do, you'll realize something that might change your entire life. You've been spending your most valuable asset without even knowing it. Most people treat time like it's endless. They say things like, "I'll start next week. I'll figure it out later. I've got time." But what they don't realize is that time is the only asset they're constantly losing without noticing. We're so glad you decided to watch our video. We're also really curious to know which cities around the world are watching our videos. Could you let us know which city, or at least which country, you're from? We always read every comment under our videos carefully. Thank you. Chapter 5. The millionaire's relationship with time money can be lost and regained. Opportunities can disappear and return. But time, once it's gone, it's gone. And this is where millionaires think completely differently. They don't just value time, they measure life through it, because they understand one powerful truth. Quote 38, let that sink in. Every hour you invest wisely builds your future. Every hour you waste unconsciously builds your regret. And most people are building regret without realizing it, scrolling for hours, repeating the same routines, delaying the same decisions, not because they don't care, but because they don't see the cost. Because time doesn't send invoices. It doesn't remind you what you lost. It just disappears quietly. But millionaires see it differently. They see time as leverage. They ask, quote 39, not just financially, but mentally, physically, strategically. They understand that an hour spent learning can multiply into years of opportunity. An hour spent building can create income for years. But an hour spent escaping, gone, no return. And here's the part that changes everything. It's not about having more time, it's about using it differently, because everyone has the same 24 hours. But not everyone has the same awareness. Most people spend time reacting. Millionaires invest time creating. That's the shift. Now think about your day. Be honest. How much of your time is intentional? And how much is automatic? How much are you choosing? And how much are you drifting? Because drifting is dangerous. It feels harmless. It feels normal. but it slowly moves you away from where you want to be. And you don't notice until years pass and nothing has changed. That's the cost of unconscious time. Now here's how millionaires break that pattern. They design their time. They don't leave it to chance. They decide in advance what matters, what doesn't, what gets their energy, because time without direction gets consumed by distraction. And in today's world, distraction is everywhere. Notifications, endless content, constant noise, designed to pull your attention away from what actually matters. And attention is where your life is built. Where your focus goes, your results follow. So if your attention is scattered, your life will feel scattered. If your attention is intentional, your life begins to align. That's why millionaires protect their focus. Not because they're extreme, but because they understand the cost of distraction. Every distraction is not just time lost. It's momentum lost. And momentum is what creates results. Now let's go deeper, because time is not just about hours. It's about timing, knowing when to act, knowing when to wait, knowing when to double down. Most people hesitate too long or rush too fast because they're reacting emotionally. But those who build wealth move with awareness. They understand that small decisions today create massive outcomes tomorrow. That's compounding, and it works in both directions. Good habits compound. Bad habits compound. Focused time compounds. Wasted time compounds. So the question is not underscore, quote, underscore 40, underscore. The real question is, quote 41, because every day you are building something, a future you want, or a future you'll regret. There is no neutral, and that's what makes time so powerful. It's always moving, always shaping, always compounding. Now imagine this. You take just 1 hour a day, and you invest it intentionally. Learning, building, growing. Not scrolling, not escaping, not delaying. Just 1 hour. That's 365 hours a year. That's over 15 full days of focused growth. Do that for 3 years, and you become unrecognizable. Not because of luck, but because of consistency. That's how millionaires think. Not in days, not in weeks, but in compounding cycles. And once you start seeing time this way, you can't go back. Because now, every wasted moment feels expensive, and every focused moment feels powerful. But here's where it gets even deeper. Because once you value time, you start making different decisions. You stop chasing things that don't matter. You stop saying yes to everything. You start protecting your energy. And that leads to the next shift, one that most people struggle with because it goes against everything they've been taught. Saying no, not out of fear, but out of clarity. And in the next chapter, you'll understand why millionaires don't try to do everything. They eliminate almost everything. And that's where real focus begins. Most people are afraid to say no, not because they don't understand its importance, but because they don't understand its power. Chapter 6, The Power of Elimination. You've been told your entire life to do more. More work, more connections, more opportunities, more everything. But nobody told you this. Quote, 42, let that land. Because this is where most people lose control of their lives. They say yes to everything. Yes to distractions. Yes to obligations. Yes to things that drain them. And then they wonder why they feel overwhelmed, why they feel stuck, why they never have time for what matters. Because their life is full, but not focused. Millionaires think differently. They are not obsessed with doing more. They are obsessed with doing what matters. And that requires something most people avoid. Elimination, not adding, removing. Because every quote 43 you give is a quote 44 to something else. Every hour you spend on something unimportant is an hour stolen from something that could change your life. That's the hidden cost. Now here's the shift. Instead of asking, quote 45, start asking, quote 46, because clarity doesn't come from addition. It comes from subtraction. Look at your life, your schedule, your habits, your environment. What is there that shouldn't be? What are you tolerating? That is quietly slowing you down, because most people are not stuck because they lack opportunity. They are stuck because they lack focus. And focus is impossible. When your life is full of noise, now understand this, saying no is not rejection. It's direction. It's deciding. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 47, underscore, underscore. And that takes confidence, because people will question you. They'll say you've changed. They'll say you're too focused, too serious, too unavailable. But what they don't see is that you're building something, and building requires sacrifice. You cannot grow and stay comfortable at the same time. You cannot level up and keep every old habit. You cannot move forward. While holding on to everything behind you, something has to go. And that's the part most people avoid, because letting go feels uncomfortable, but holding on is what keeps them stuck. Millionaires understand this deeply. They protect their time. They protect their energy. They protect their attention, not because they're selfish, but because they're intentional. They know that every distraction comes with a cost, and they're not willing to pay it. Now let's go deeper, because elimination is not just external, it's internal. You have to eliminate excuses, doubt, limiting beliefs, old identities, because you cannot think like a millionaire while holding on to a broke mindset. You cannot build a new life with old patterns. And that's where real transformation begins, not when you add more knowledge, but when you remove what's holding you back. Now imagine this. You wake up and your day is clear. No unnecessary noise, no wasted energy, no distractions pulling you in every direction. Just focus, just intention, just movement toward your goals. That's power, that's control. And that's what creates momentum. Because when your energy is not scattered, it becomes concentrated. And concentrated energy creates results faster than anything else. This is why some people move forward quickly, while others stay stuck for years. It's not intelligence, it's not luck. It's clarity. Clarity of what matters, and the discipline to eliminate everything else. Now here's the truth most people don't want to hear. You already know what's wasting your time. You already know what's distracting you. You already know what needs to go. But you haven't made the decision yet. And until you do, nothing changes. So this is your moment. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now. Decide what stays. Decide what goes. Because every day you delay elimination. You delay your growth, and growth does not wait. Now here's where it gets even more interesting, because once you eliminate distractions, once you gain clarity, once your focus sharpens, you start to notice something powerful. Your standards begin to rise. What you tolerate changes. What you accept changes. What you expect from yourself changes. And in the next chapter, You're going to discover why standards, not goals, are what truly determine your financial future. Because goals can inspire you, but standards, they control how you live every single day. And once those rise, everything else follows. Most people set goals, they write them down. They get excited. They promise themselves, quote, 48. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, they believe it. Then life happens. Energy drops. Focus fades. Old habits return. And just like that, the goal disappears. Chapter 7. Standards over goals. Here's the truth most people never understand. Goals don't change your life. Standards do. Let that sit with you, because goals are temporary. They are something you aim for. But standards are what you live by. Every single day, a goal says, quote, 49. A standard says, quote, 50. A goal says, quote, 51. A standard says, quote, underscore 52. Do you see the difference? One is a wish, the other is a rule. And rules change behavior. Millionaires don't rely on motivation. They rely on standards. Because motivation fades, but standards stay. Standards define what you accept, what you allow, what you repeat. And your life is a reflection of what you tolerate. If you tolerate laziness, you get inconsistency. If you tolerate distraction, you get confusion. If you tolerate poor decisions, you get poor results. But when your standards rise, everything changes. You don't negotiate with yourself anymore. You don't say, quote, underscore 53. You say, quote, underscore 54. And identity is powerful. Because once something becomes part of your identity, you stop questioning it. You just do it. That's why some people are disciplined and others struggle. It's not willpower, it's identity. One person says, quote, 55. The other says, quote, underscore 56. And that small shift creates completely different actions. Now here's where it gets real. Your current life is a reflection of your current standards, not your potential, not your intentions, your standards. What you allow yourself to do daily, what you tolerate from yourself. That's what builds your reality. So if your results are not where you want them to be, the question is not, quote, 57. The question is, quote, 58. Because once the standard rises, the behavior follows automatically. Now think about this. What are your current standards around money? Be honest. Do you track it or ignore it? Do you invest or hesitate? Do you spend intentionally or emotionally? Because those answers tell the story of your financial life. And here's the part most people avoid. Raising your standards will feel uncomfortable at first because you're stepping out of your old identity. You're becoming someone new, and that creates resistance. But that resistance is a sign of growth. It means you're moving. It means you're evolving. And evolution always feels unfamiliar in the beginning. But over time, it becomes normal. That's how transformation works, not in big moments, but in small, repeated decisions, driven by higher standards. Now imagine this. You wake up and your standards don't allow you to waste time. Your standards don't allow you to avoid responsibility. Your standards don't allow you to stay stuck. You don't need motivation. You don't need reminders because your identity has shifted. You've become someone who moves forward no matter what. That's power. That's control. And that's how millionaires think. They don't rely on feeling ready. They rely on who they've decided to become. Now here's where it gets even deeper. Because once your standards rise, you start seeing things differently. Opportunities you ignored before become obvious. Mistakes you repeated before become unacceptable. Your awareness sharpens, and that awareness leads to better decisions, and better decisions lead to better results. But there's one more layer, one that most people completely overlook, because even with high standards, even with strong discipline, even with clear thinking, there is still one thing that can silently destroy everything. Fear. Not loud fear, not obvious fear, but quiet hesitation, doubt, overthinking. And in the next chapter, you're going to uncover how fear disguises itself and how it has been holding you back without you even realizing it. Because once you see it clearly, you stop being controlled by it. And that's when real confidence begins. Fear is rarely loud. It doesn't always scream, quote, 59, most of the time. It whispers, quote, 60, quote, 61, quote, 62. And because it sounds reasonable, you listen. Chapter 8, The Silent Enemy, Fear in Disguise. Most people think fear looks like panic, but that's not the fear that keeps you broke. The real fear is subtle. It hides behind logic. It disguises itself as caution. It feels like thinking, but it's actually hesitation. And hesitation is one of the most expensive habits you can have. Because while you're thinking, someone else is moving. While you're analyzing, someone else is learning. While you're waiting for certainty, someone else is building momentum. And momentum changes everything. Now let's be clear. Fear is not the problem. Fear is natural. It's human. Even millionaires feel it. The difference is they don't obey it. Most people feel fear and stop. Millionaires feel fear and move anyway. That's the shift. Not removing fear, but removing its control. Because here's the truth. Quote 63. Let that sink in. You don't become confident and then take action. You take action and confidence follows. But most people do the opposite. They wait to feel ready. They wait to feel certain. They wait to feel confident. And that moment never comes. Because readiness is created through movement, not thought. Now think about this. How many opportunities have you missed because you hesitated? How many times did you say, quote, 64, quote, 65, quote, 66, and later you realized you should have moved? That's fear, not obvious, not dramatic, but powerful, because it delays action, and delayed action kills momentum. Now here's what millionaires understand. They don't aim to eliminate fear. They aim to shorten the gap. Between fear and action, they feel it and they move quickly because they know something most people ignore. The longer you sit in fear, the bigger it feels. The more you think, the more doubt grows, the more scenarios you create, the more reasons you find not to act. And suddenly, a simple decision becomes overwhelming. That's the trap. Overthinking is not intelligence, it's fear, stretched out. And it keeps people stuck for years. Now here's the shift. Next time you feel hesitation, pause and ask yourself, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 67, underscore, underscore. Because those are not the same. Thinking leads to clarity. Avoiding leads to delay. And delay costs more than mistakes. Let me say that again. Delay costs more than mistakes. Because mistakes teach. Mistakes move you forward. Mistakes create experience. But delay? Delay keeps you exactly where you are. And time keeps moving anyway. That's why millionaires are not afraid of being wrong. They are afraid of staying still. They understand that action creates feedback. Feedback creates improvement. Improvement creates results. But none of that happens without movement. Now let's go deeper, because fear doesn't just stop action. It also shrinks your thinking. It makes you play small. It makes you choose safe options. It makes you avoid risk. And while that feels comfortable, it limits your growth, because everything that changes your life, lives outside your comfort zone, new opportunities, new skills, new levels of income, all require expansion, and expansion feels uncomfortable. But uncomfortable does not mean dangerous. It means new, and new is where growth happens. Now imagine this. You start acting faster, not recklessly, but decisively. You stop waiting for perfect timing. You stop needing full certainty. You trust your ability to adjust, to learn, to figure it out as you go. That's confidence, not knowing everything, but trusting yourself to handle anything. And that trust is what allows you to move forward, even when fear is present. Because fear never fully disappears, but it loses power when you stop obeying it. Now here's where it all connects. Because once you take action despite fear, something powerful happens. Your perspective changes. You realize it wasn't as hard as you thought. It wasn't as risky as you imagined. It wasn't as impossible as it felt. And that realization builds courage, and courage builds momentum, and momentum builds results. This is how growth compounds. One decision at a time. One action at a time. One step beyond fear at a time. But there's another layer, because even if you overcome fear, even if you take action, even if you start building momentum, there is still something that can slow you down. Something subtle, something most people underestimate. Your environment, the people around you, the conversations you hear daily. Because in the next chapter, you're going to discover why your environment is either accelerating your growth or silently keeping you stuck. And once you see it clearly, you'll understand why changing your thinking sometimes requires changing your surroundings. Most people underestimate one of the most powerful forces shaping their life. It's not talent. It's not luck. It's not even effort. It's environment. If you like this audiobook, please give it a like. It will really help us promote the video. Chapter 9. Your environment is programming you. Whether you realize it or not, you are being influenced every single day by what you hear, by what you see, by who you spend time with, and over time, that influence becomes your thinking, and your thinking becomes your life. Most people don't choose their environment, they inherit it. Friends they grew up with, conversations they got used to, habits that became normal, and slowly, without realizing it, they adapt to it. They start thinking the same way, acting the same way, limiting themselves in the same ways. Because environment is powerful. It doesn't force you. It shapes you. Quietly. Consistently. Now here's the truth. Millionaires understand early. Quote 68. Let that sink in. If you are surrounded by people who complain, you will start to normalize complaining. If you are surrounded by people who avoid risk, you will start to avoid it too. If you are surrounded by people who think small, you will shrink without even noticing. Not because you're weak, but because repetition creates identity, and environment controls repetition. Now, this doesn't mean you blame your surroundings. Remember Chapter 1, Responsibility. It means you become aware, because once you're aware, you can choose differently. Millionaires are intentional about their environment. They don't just hope for the right influence, they build it. They seek out people who think bigger, conversations that challenge them, information that expands their perspective, because they understand something most people ignore. Quote 69, and your standards shape your results. Now think about your current environment, the people you talk to most. What do they talk about? Growth or problems? Solutions or excuses? Opportunities or limitations? Because those conversations are shaping your thinking every single day. And here's the uncomfortable part. If you stay in an environment that doesn't grow, you will eventually stop growing too, even if you're motivated, even if you want more, because your surroundings will slowly pull you back to what feels normal. That's why change feels difficult, not because it's impossible, but because it's unfamiliar. And humans are wired to return to what feels familiar, even if it's limiting. Now here's the shift. You don't need to cut everyone off. You don't need to isolate yourself. But you do need to upgrade your exposure, add new voices, new perspectives, new standards, because growth requires new input. If you keep feeding your mind the same information, you will keep producing the same results. It's that simple. Now let's go deeper. Because environment is not just people. It's everything. Your phone, your habits, your daily inputs, what you watch, what you listen to, what you consume mentally. Because all of it programs your thinking. Most people wake up and immediately consume noise, social media, random content, distractions. And before they even start their day, their mind is already scattered, already reactive, already influenced. That's not a strong environment. That's a chaotic one. And chaos does not build clarity. Millionaires protect their mental space. They don't allow random input to shape their thinking. They choose what they consume because they understand. Quote 70. So if you feed it distraction, you get confusion. If you feed it negativity, you get limitation. If you feed it growth, you get expansion. That's the equation. Now imagine this. You change your environment, not overnight, but intentionally. You start listening to better conversations. You start learning from people ahead of you. You start exposing yourself to higher standards. At first, it feels uncomfortable. You feel out of place. You feel like you don't belong yet. That's normal, because you're stepping into a new level. But over time, that discomfort becomes normal. And what used to feel intimidating becomes familiar. And once it becomes familiar, it becomes your standard. That's how transformation happens. Not just from within, but from what surrounds you. Now here's the final piece. Your environment will either pull you forward or hold you back. There is no neutral. So the question is, quote, 71, because the answer to that question will determine your future. Now here's where it all connects. Because once your environment shifts, your thinking expands, your standards rise, your actions improve, and your results begin to change. But there is still one final piece, one that ties everything together. Because even with the right environment, even with strong thinking, even with action, there is one thing that determines whether you succeed or fall back into old patterns. Consistency. And in the next chapter, you're going to understand why consistency, not intensity, is what builds real wealth. Because anyone can start strong, but very few people know how to continue. Most people start strong. They get motivated. They get inspired. They decide, quote, 72. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, they do everything right. They wake up early. They stay focused. They take action. And then they stop. Chapter 10, Consistency is the real flex. This is where most people lose, not at the beginning, but in the middle. When things are no longer exciting, when results are not immediate, when progress feels slow. Because here's the truth. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 73, underscore, underscore, and continuation is where wealth is built. Millionaires don't rely on bursts of motivation. They rely on consistency, because consistency compounds, just like money, just like time, just like habits. Small actions, repeated daily, create massive outcomes over time. But most people don't trust small actions. They want big results, fast. So when they don't see immediate change, they quit. They think it's not working, but it is working, just not visibly yet. And that's the trap, because real growth is invisible at first. It happens beneath the surface, quietly, gradually, until one day it shows. But if you quit before that moment, you never see the reward. That's why consistency matters more than intensity. Let me say that again. Consistency beats intensity, because intensity is emotional. It comes and goes. But consistency is a decision, a standard, a system. It doesn't depend on how you feel. It depends on who you've decided to be. Now think about this. What would happen if you showed up every single day, even when you didn't feel like it? Not perfectly, not intensely, just consistently. 1 hour of focus, one smart decision, one step forward, every day. No breaks in identity, no resets, no starting over, just continuation. That's how momentum is built, and momentum is powerful. Because once it builds, it carries you forward. It makes things easier. It creates rhythm, and rhythm creates progress. Now here's the part most people avoid. Consistency is boring. It's not exciting. It's not dramatic. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough. It feels repetitive. And that's why most people don't stick with it. They chase excitement instead of results. But millionaires understand something deeper. Quote, 74. They don't need constant stimulation. They don't need constant change. They need stability. Because stability creates reliability, and reliability creates trust, not just from others, but from yourself. And self-trust is everything. Because when you trust yourself to show up, no matter what, you become unstoppable. Not because you're perfect, but because you're consistent. Now let's go deeper. Because consistency is not just about action. It's about identity. You don't say, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 75, underscore, underscore. You say, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 76, underscore, underscore. And then you act accordingly, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when no one is watching. Because that's where real discipline is built, in the quiet moments, in the invisible work, in the decisions no one sees. That's where your future is being created. Now imagine this. You remove the idea of motivation completely. You don't wait to feel ready. You don't wait to feel inspired. You just follow your system daily, without negotiation, without excuses. That's power. That's control. And that's how millionaires operate. They don't rise and fall with emotions. They move with structure, because structure creates freedom, and freedom is built through consistency. Now here's the final truth of this chapter. Consistency is not about doing everything. It's about doing what matters again and again and again until it becomes who you are. And once it becomes who you are, success is no longer something you chase. It becomes something you naturally create. But here's where it gets even deeper, because even with consistency, even with discipline, even with strong thinking, there is still one thing that separates those who build wealth from those who stay stuck. And it's not what you expect. It's not effort. It's not intelligence. It's not even opportunity. It's how you think about value, because in the next chapter, you're going to understand why millionaires don't chase money. They create value. And once you truly understand that shift, you'll realize something powerful. Money was never the goal. It was always the result. Most people chase money. They wake up thinking about it. They stress about it. They measure their life by how much of it they have. And yet, the more they chase it, the further it seems to get. Chapter 11. Stop chasing money. Start creating value. Here's the truth that changes everything. Money is not the goal. Money is the result. Let that land. Because this is where most people get it wrong. They focus on the outcome instead of the cause. They ask, quote, 77. But millionaires ask a different question, quote, 78. And that shift changes the entire game, because money flows to value, always, not effort, not time. Value. Let me explain. You can work 10 hours a day doing something that creates little value and earn very little. Or you can spend 1 hour doing something that creates massive value and earn exponentially more. Same time, different outcome. Why? Because of value. The marketplace does not reward effort. It rewards impact. It rewards solutions. It rewards people who solve problems better, faster, or differently than others. That's how wealth is created. Now think about this. What problem are you solving? What value are you creating? Because if your income is low, it's not a judgment. It's feedback. Feedback about the level of value being exchanged. And that's not bad news. That's powerful, because it means you can change it by increasing your value. Now here's where most people get stuck. They think value means working harder, doing more, pushing more, but that's not it. Value is not about effort. It's about usefulness. How useful are your skills? How valuable are your ideas? How impactful is what you create? That's what determines your income. Millionaires understand this deeply. They invest in themselves, not just financially, but mentally. They build skills. They learn. They adapt, because they know. Quote 79. They don't chase money. They attract it by becoming someone who creates value. Now let's go deeper, because value is not just about what you do. It's about how you think. A value-driven thinker asks, quote, 80, quote, 81, quote, 82. They look for gaps, opportunities, ways to contribute, and contribution creates demand, and demand creates income. That's the chain. But most people don't think this way. They think in tasks instead of, and that keeps them limited, because tasks are replaceable. Value is not. Now imagine this. You stop focusing on earning and start focusing on becoming more skilled, more aware, more capable. You start asking, quote, 85, quote, 86, quote, 87. And over time, that focus compounds. Your thinking sharpens, your abilities grow, your opportunities expand, and suddenly, money starts showing up, not because you chased it, but because you became someone who attracts it. That's the shift. Now, here's something deeper. Value is not always visible immediately. Just like consistency, it compounds. You might not see results right away, but every skill you build, every problem you solve, every improvement you make is stacking, and eventually it becomes undeniable. That's how breakthroughs happen, not overnight, but through accumulated value. Now here's the part most people miss. Creating value requires patience because you are investing in yourself before the world rewards you, and that's uncomfortable because there's a delay between effort and outcome. But millionaires trust the process. They understand that value always pays, even if it takes time, and that patience is what separates them from everyone else. Now imagine this. You stop asking, __quote _88 __, and start asking, __quote _89 __, not blindly, not without direction, but strategically, with intention, with growth, with awareness, because giving value does not reduce you. It expands you. It builds your reputation, your skills, your opportunities, and over time, it builds your income. That's the equation. Now here's where it connects to everything you've learned so far. Your beliefs shape your thinking. Your thinking shapes your actions. Your actions shape your value. Your value shapes your income. It's all connected. And once you understand that, you stop looking for shortcuts because there are none. Only growth, only improvement, only becoming. Now here's the transition, because once you start creating value, once you shift your focus, once you begin building something meaningful, there is something that will test you, something that stops most people right when they start making progress. Comparison, looking at others, measuring yourself against them, feeling behind, feeling not enough. And in the next chapter, you're going to understand why comparison is one of the most dangerous habits you can have, and how it silently destroys your confidence, even when you're moving in the right direction. Because once you break that pattern, you unlock a new level of focus, a new level of clarity, and a new level of growth. Most people won't admit it, but they're constantly watching others, scrolling, comparing, measuring their life against someone else's highlight. And slowly, without realizing it, they start to feel behind. Chapter 12. The Comparison Trap. You see someone succeeding, and instead of feeling inspired, you feel pressure, you feel doubt. You start questioning yourself. Quote 90, quote 91, quote 92. And just like that, your focus shifts from building your life to analyzing someone else's. That's the trap, because comparison feels productive. It feels like awareness, but most of the time, it's distraction, and distraction kills momentum. Here's the truth millionaires understand. Quote 93. Let that sink in. Every minute you spend comparing is a minute you're not building. Every thought you spend doubting yourself is a thought not invested in growth. And over time, that adds up. Now here's the deeper problem. Comparison distorts reality. You don't see the full picture. You see results, but not the process. You see success, but not the struggle. You see outcomes, but not the years of consistency behind them. And because of that, you create a false standard, an unrealistic timeline, and then you judge yourself against it. That's not fair. That's not accurate. And it's definitely not productive. Millionaires don't ignore others, but they don't measure themselves against them either. They use others as reference, not as validation. They ask, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 94, underscore, underscore, not, quote, 95. That shift protects their focus, because focus is everything. Now think about this. Every time you compare yourself, what happens to your energy? Does it increase or does it drop? Most of the time, it drains you. It creates frustration. It creates doubt. And doubt slows action. And slowed action delays results. That's the hidden cost of comparison. It doesn't just affect your mindset. It affects your behavior. Now, here's the truth you need to understand. You are on a different timeline, different background, different experiences, different opportunities. So comparing your journey to someone else's is like comparing two completely different paths. It doesn't make sense, and it doesn't help you move forward. Now here's the shift. Instead of comparing yourself to others, compare yourself to your past. Ask, because that comparison creates growth. It creates momentum. It keeps you focused on what matters, you. Now let's go deeper. Because comparison doesn't just happen externally, it happens internally. You compare yourself to who you think you underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 99, underscore, underscore, B. You set expectations without understanding the process. And when you don't meet them, you feel like you're failing. But you're not failing. You're learning. You're growing. You're in the process. And the process is where transformation happens. Millionaires trust the process. They don't rush it. They don't panic. They stay focused on their path because they understand something powerful. Quote 100. That's it. Not someone on the internet, not someone in your circle, you. Because when you improve daily, even slightly, you compound. Just like time, just like money, just like habits. And over time, that small improvement becomes massive change. Now imagine this. You stop comparing. You stop measuring your life against others. You stop letting external noise affect your internal state, and instead, you focus completely on your growth, your actions, your progress, your path. That's clarity. That's power. That's control. Because now, your energy is not scattered. It's directed, and directed energy creates results faster, stronger, more consistently. Now, here's the final truth of this chapter. Comparison is not just a distraction. It's a decision to look outward instead of inward. And every time you choose inward focus, you move forward. Every time you choose comparison, you slow down. So the choice is yours. Every day, where will your attention go? Because your attention is building your future. Now here's where it gets even deeper. Because once you stop comparing, once you regain focus, once you start building your own path, there is something else that begins to happen. You start seeing opportunities that were always there, but you couldn't see before. And in the next chapter, you're going to understand why most people miss opportunities, even when they're right in front of them, and how millionaires train their mind to recognize them instantly. Because opportunity is not rare. Awareness is. And once your awareness expands, your life begins to expand with it. Opportunities are everywhere, but most people never see them, not because they're blind, but because they're not looking the right way. Hang on a sec. Write in the comments what you'd like us to talk about in the next video. We promise to read all the comments and pick the best and most relevant topics. Thanks. Chapter 13. Why You Keep Missing Opportunities. You've probably said this before. I never get opportunities. Nothing ever comes my way. Some people just get lucky. But here's the truth. Opportunities don't appear. They are recognized, and recognition depends on awareness. Let that sink in. Because two people can be in the exact same situation and see completely different things. One sees a problem, the other sees potential. One sees risk, the other sees leverage. One hesitates, the other acts. Same environment, different thinking, different result. Now, here's why this happens. Most people are trained to look for security, stability, predictability, comfort. So when something uncertain appears, they ignore it or they avoid it because it doesn't feel safe. But opportunities rarely feel safe. They feel uncertain. They feel unfamiliar. They feel risky. And that's why most people miss them, because they are waiting for opportunity to look comfortable. But it never does. Millionaires understand this. They don't wait for certainty. They look for potential. They ask, what could this become? What can I do with this? How can I use this? That mindset turns ordinary situations into opportunities. Now think about your own life. How many times did something show up and you ignored it? An idea, a connection, a chance to learn something new. But you said, I'll do it later. I'm not ready. It's probably nothing. And then later, you realized it was something. That's not bad luck. That's missed awareness. Now here's the deeper truth. Opportunities don't always look big. They often look small. A conversation, a skill, a piece of information. But small opportunities compound into big outcomes just like everything else. That's why awareness matters. Because awareness allows you to see value where others see nothing. Now here's the shift. Stop asking, where are the opportunities? Start asking, what am I not seeing? Because the opportunity might already be there. You just haven't recognized it yet. And recognition is a skill, a trainable skill. Millionaires train their mind to look differently. They don't just consume information. They analyze it. They connect ideas. They look for patterns because patterns reveal opportunities. Now let's go deeper because opportunity is not just external. It's internal. Your skills, your knowledge, your experiences. Most people underestimate what they already have. They think, I need more before I start. But millionaires ask, what can I do with what I have right now? That's leverage, using what's available instead of waiting for something better, because waiting delays everything. Now imagine this. You start looking at your life differently. Every situation becomes a question. What's the opportunity here? Every challenge becomes, what can I learn from this? Every interaction becomes, what can come from this? That's awareness, and awareness expands your reality. Because now, you're not just living. You're observing, you're analyzing, you're creating, and creation leads to opportunity. Now here's something powerful. The more you act on opportunities, the more opportunities appear. Because action builds momentum. Momentum builds visibility. Visibility creates more chances. That's how it compounds. But if you hesitate, if you ignore, if you delay, that chain never starts. And your life stays the same. That's why awareness alone is not enough. You need action. Because recognition without action is wasted potential. Now here's the final truth of this chapter. Opportunities are not rare. They are constant, but only visible. to those who are prepared to see them. So the real question is, am I thinking in a way that allows me to recognize opportunity? Because if the answer is no, that's where your work begins. Now, here's where it all connects. Because once you start recognizing opportunities, once you begin acting on them, once your awareness expands, there is something else you need to understand. Something that determines whether you hold on to success or lose it. And that is your relationship with risk. Because in the next chapter, you're going to discover why most people fear risk and how that fear keeps them stuck, even when opportunity is right in front of them. And once you understand risk the way millionaires do, you'll stop avoiding it and start using it. Most people hear the word risk and they immediately think danger, loss, failure, so they avoid it. They stay safe, they stay comfortable, they stay exactly where they are. Chapter 14, The Truth About Risk. Here's what most people never realize. Avoiding risk is the biggest risk of all. Let that sit with you, because playing safe feels smart, but over time, it becomes expensive. You stay in the same job, you delay new opportunities, you avoid decisions that could change your life, and years pass with no real progress, not because you lacked ability, but because you avoided uncertainty. Now here's the shift. Millionaires don't avoid risk, they redefine it. To them, risk is not taking action blindly. Risk is staying stuck. Risk is wasting time. Risk is not growing. That's what they fear, because they understand something most people ignore. There is no zero-risk path in life. You are always risking something. If you take action, you risk failure. If you don't take action, you risk regret. So the question is not, should I take a risk? The real question is, which risk am I willing to live with? And that question changes everything. Now let's go deeper, because not all risk is the same. There is reckless risk, and there is calculated risk. Reckless risk is emotional, it's impulsive, unplanned, driven by ego or excitement. Calculated risk is strategic, it's thought through, measured, aligned with growth. Millionaires take calculated risks. They don't jump blindly, they prepare, they learn, they analyze, but then they act, because they know that overthinking kills opportunity. Now here's where most people get stuck. They wait for certainty. They want guarantees. They want to know it will work before they move. But certainty does not exist. Not in business, not in investing, not in life. So if you wait for certainty, you will wait forever. Millionaires accept uncertainty. They don't need full clarity. They need enough clarity to take the next step. And then they adjust. That's how progress is made, step by step, decision by decision. Now think about this. What risks have you been avoiding? Opportunities you didn't take, decisions you delayed, moves you knew you should make, but didn't, because it felt uncomfortable, because it felt uncertain, because it felt risky. But what did avoiding those risks cost you? Time, growth, opportunities, because every avoided risk has a hidden cost. And most of the time, that cost is bigger than the risk itself. Now, here's the shift. Start seeing risk differently. Instead of asking, what if it goes wrong? Ask, what if it goes right? Because your mind naturally focuses on the negative, on what could fail. But that's not the full picture. There is also potential, opportunity, growth. And if you never consider that side, you limit yourself. Now here's something deeper. Taking risks builds something more valuable than money. It builds confidence, because every time you step into uncertainty and handle it, you prove something to yourself. I can do this. I can figure it out. I can adapt. And that self-trust is priceless, because once you trust yourself, you stop hesitating. You stop overthinking. You start moving faster, and speed creates advantage. Now imagine this. You stop avoiding risk, not recklessly, but intentionally. You start making decisions with awareness. You accept that not everything will work, but you also understand that not trying guarantees nothing will change. That's freedom. That's growth. That's how millionaires think. Now here's the final truth of this chapter. Risk is not something to fear. It's something to understand, to manage, to use. Because on the other side of risk is opportunity. And on the other side of opportunity is growth. And on the other side of growth is a completely different life. But you only get there if you move. Now, here's where it all connects. Because once you start taking risks, once you begin stepping into uncertainty, once you start growing, you will face something inevitable. Failure. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. And in the next chapter, you're going to understand why failure is not the opposite of success, but the foundation of it. Because once you change your relationship with failure, you remove one of the biggest barriers to growth. And when that barrier disappears, everything becomes possible. Most people think failure is the end, a sign they're not good enough, a signal to stop, proof that it wasn't meant for them. So they avoid it. They play safe, they hesitate, they stay inside their comfort zone, and in doing that, they unknowingly block their own success. Chapter 15. Failure is the price of growth. Here's the truth that changes everything. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is part of the process. Let that sink in, because once you truly understand this, you stop fearing failure and start using it. Most people see failure emotionally. They take it personally. If I failed, it means I'm not capable. But millionaires see it differently. They see failure as data, feedback, information. They don't ask, why did this happen to me? They ask, what is this teaching me? That shift turns every failure into progress. Now think about this. Every skill you have today, you once failed at. Walking, speaking, learning. You didn't get it right the first time. You tried, you failed, you adjusted, and eventually you succeeded. So why should money, business, or success be any different? Now imagine this. You walk away from this different, not emotionally, but mentally. You see things differently. You think differently. You act differently, not because you're trying harder, but because you've decided differently. That's the power. That's the shift. Now here's something deeper. Everything you want is on the other side of consistency. Not one decision, not one moment, but repeated action. Aligned with who you are becoming. That's how identity is built. That's how results are created. That's how lives are changed. Now let's bring it all together. You don't blame anymore. You take responsibility. You don't react emotionally. You respond intentionally. You don't chase money. You create value. You don't waste time. You invest it. You don't compare. You focus. You don't avoid fear. You act despite it. You don't fear failure. You use it. You don't wait for confidence. You build it. You don't drift. You design. You don't quit. You stay consistent. You don't try. You become. That's the difference. That's the mindset. That's the life. Now here's the final truth. Simple, clear, unavoidable. Your life will always reflect your thinking, not what you say, not what you wish, what you consistently think and consistently do. So if you want a different life, you need a different standard, a different identity, a different way of thinking, and that's what you built here. Now it's up to you to live it. Now, before this ends, I want you to do something, not for me, for you. If something in this audiobook shifted your thinking, if a line stayed with you, if you felt that moment of clarity, acknowledge it. Maybe you hit like not for approval, but as a personal contract, a signal that this moment mattered. Maybe you write in the comments, what is the one standard I'm taking from this? Not for others, but to make it real, to declare it, to commit to it. Because spoken decisions hold more weight. And if you know someone who is stuck, who is searching, who needs this shift, share it. Because sometimes one message at the right time changes everything. Now take a breath and remember this, not tomorrow, not next week, now, because the person you become is built in moments like this. And here's the line you carry forward. You don't become wealthy when you make money. You become wealthy when you think differently and refuse to go back.